वही कर मेरे भी पर
what we're seeing on the ground in Afghanistan, particularly for the ethnic minorities, particularly for Afghan women and girls, is a complete and total contravention of the most basic human rights. This is like a really big concern, particularly for women and girls, for ethnic minorities, including the Hazara Afghans, Afghan Hindus, Afghan Sikhs, that the UN holds. And it's a shame that the international community at a time like this continues to be quiet. This crisis, this humanitarian crisis, not an Afghan crisis, a humanitarian world crisis deserves the attention.
Hello and welcome back to The Logical Indian. I'm Apurwa Shrivastava, and joining us for a conversation today is Neelofar Mansuri. She's an Afghan community activist who has family and friends back in Afghanistan. Neelofar is also a volunteer with the Afghan Women's Organization. Neelofar, thank you very much for finding time to speak to me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the platform, The Logical Indian, for opening up this space for discussion. Our community really appreciates it. We're grateful for any sort of amplification on the matters that are going on back home.
I'm really sad that we're talking at behest of such a tragedy, but So the reports of brutality by the Talibs have, already started to do the rounds. Now, to begin with, could you talk about your immediate fears, in the wake of this crisis that has befallen Afghanistan?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Right now, the greatest concern, I think, is that of uncertainty. The people back home and those that have families across the world, the situation there, everyone's fearful. Nobody really has a proper understanding of exactly what the steps are moving forward in the Taliban's decision to be noticed as a legitimate government. So right now, Kabul has been seized, as I'm sure you know, the presidential palace has been seized. The whole country is controlled by the group, and this is like a really big concern, particularly for women and girls, for ethnic minorities, including the Hazara Afghans, Afghan Hindus, Afghan Sikhs. So what we're trying to figure out right now is where we can get and access the most credible sources, the most credible pieces of information, so we can get a proper understanding and an accurate understanding of what is really going on the ground.
So, some political observers have even now they say that this extremist organization has reformed themselves. Is it a lot to expect? What do you say?
I think it's really, really tough, especially because it's only been about a couple of days that they've taken over the presidential palace. But the reality of all of this is that past history has shown how cruel this group could be. And if they are making these claims of reforming, then I don't think the international community should offer them the legitimacy that a government should have until they come around the table and decide what principles they're going to commit to moving forward. So the problem for us is that we have family and friends back home who are telling us otherwise. And again, the uncertainty and fear around the whole situation makes it really difficult to know what to believe, and also to foresee what is going to take place in the coming weeks or even in the coming months.
So, what emotions and thoughts, come to mind currently?
I mean, obviously the community is devastated. I think more so, however, the world is devastated. The world is starting to notice. I don't think this should be limited to just an issue for the Afghan people. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a humanitarian issue. It's something that people like yourself who have taken the time to reach out to our community through advocates like myself, you are feeling this pain too, right? The biggest thing that we all need to remember here is that there's a lot of politics going on in this situation, and unfortunately those who are being left behind and paying the price for it are innocent civilians. And perhaps moving forward, we really need to focus in on this and move with the lens where we're looking at the people before the politics and realizing exactly what they need from us as an international community, what they need from us as advocates, as activists, as volunteers, to ensure that they don't get forgotten, and that in this blame game and this sometimes divisive kind of political discourse, that they're not the ones that continue to pay the price, and ultimately many of them unfortunately lose their lives from that too, right?
Right. So, Neelofar, you are an advocate, especially for women and rights of the girls and women in Afghanistan. How afresh do you think are the old memories of extreme brutality against girls? And especially in the minds of Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan today.
I mean, I see this like issue as being one that our community has faced and dealt with for so many years, right? I know right now these concerns are in the news, and I know the world has finally started to take this, but it's decades of a permanent state of war due to colonization, due to foreign intervention that my parents and their parents before them have been going through. There's 100% mental and emotional trauma that comes out of this, especially for my parents and other Afghan communities and other Afghan individuals who have already gone through this, right? We're seeing almost a recurrence of what had taken place in the past. And again, the main priority here, the main concern are the vulnerable groups like the women and girls. So the emotions run high, obviously, particularly because for those of us who are so fortunate to be in places and homes where we are offered safety, security, and freedom, we put ourselves in the shoes of the women and girls back home, many of whom we know, many of whom are family and friends. And it's heartbreaking, it's devastating, and we really, really hope that the international community will step in and call for change.
Oh, absolutely. So, yesterday the spokesperson of the Talib said that, women will be happy. Just today we saw reports of women's faces being erased at public, places. What is running in the minds of women in Afghanistan now, to flee the place, but how, or, to sort of figure a way to stay and protest. How does the future, of women, especially, look from up close?
Again, like the future of the women in Afghanistan right now it's so uncertain, right? And imagine, like, for the past, I mean, since the beginning of this US-led war, international communities and international governments have supported the development and progress of women and girls in Afghanistan, particularly Canada taking a leadership role on that front. And we're seeing that all crumble. And we're not just seeing it, we're hearing it. I've had several messages. I can't explain to you. I would probably say as many as 1,000 messages from students, from journalists, from teachers, professors, all the way up to the parliament, from women parliamentarian MPs. Like the crisis now threatens their dignified life. It threatens their liberty, their education, their opportunities for employment, their livelihood. And unfortunately, the reality of this is that now, because they have to flee their homes, they are leaving everything behind, right? So many of them have worked on initiatives. The Afghan women's robotics team, the girls' robotics team, for example, they're a wonderful example of the potential that Afghan women and girls have back home, and how they utilize and take hold of those opportunities and make the most of them. And unfortunately, with the uncertainty of what is going to happen with the government of Afghanistan and with the Taliban's intervention, we don't really know, what we're going to be left with now.
Right. So, like you rightly said, Afghan women all around the world, at least majority of them, do not kind of like seem to trust this organization for all the right reasons. In fact, I've been reading, I mean, looking at reports, coming from rural Afghanistan where women have been beaten and killed. There are children being torn away from their mothers. It's being said that the group is showing the world what it wants to see from the capital city of Kabul, but is bringing back regressive laws chunk by chunk in other parts of Afghanistan. Would you mind analyzing this for us a little bit?
I mean, in a very high level, or more so, I guess, basic analysis, like what we're seeing, and especially like you said, if there's no reformation of what has taken place in the past, what we're seeing on the ground in Afghanistan, particularly for the ethnic minorities, particularly for Afghan women and girls, is a complete and total contravention of the most basic human rights, right? That people should be afforded across the world, the basic elements of international humanitarian law. It stands against the principles of peacekeeping. It stands against the principles of dignity, of equality, that the UN holds. And it's a shame that the international community at a time like this continues to be quiet. Perhaps there are maybe 3 or 4 governments that have spoken up on the issue. I know Canada's taken leadership on it as well, but until the international community comes together around a table and decides that this crisis, this humanitarian crisis, not an Afghan crisis, that a humanitarian world crisis deserves the attention and deserves the intervention from the international communities, I don't know if we're going to see any sort of change.
So, Neelofar, this group has, talking about minority, like you were just mentioning, they've communicated a, sort of reconciliatory tone, on minority rights of Hindus and Sikhs, and have assured their safety and the safety of their cultures. How do you see this?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what we previously discussed, right? Past history has shown otherwise. This for I know for many, not just Afghan Canadians, but activists, humanitarians across the world, they're words, right? These words have to be followed up with actions, concrete actions. It cannot be a temporary promise. The international community has to hold the group accountable. They have to hold them accountable and ensure that they move forward with these commitments, and that they don't say one thing and do the other, which is the easiest way to put it. And especially at a time where, like you mentioned, the most vulnerable groups are at risk, that's when we need to join our voices, call on the international community, ensure that these promises for human rights, for freedoms, and for the values that we as a world should hold and impose on every state and on every body of governance, be not just promised, but actually acted upon.
You're talking of governance, like you mentioned. Can it yet be said that the crisis shall end a potential for democracy in Afghanistan? What is the best and worst case scenario for Afghanistan going forward in terms of governance?
Again, the situation is so uncertain. I don't think we can determine either or right now. And I also don't think this is like a two-way solution. I don't think there's an either or. The situation is multifaceted. It's so complex. There's so many international players in this political discourse and in this political situation. This, again, has not been something that Afghanistan has only been facing this week or last week or this month. It's been 40 years of nonstop foreign intervention, a permanent state of war. Since 2001, it's been a US-led war. And I think it's really disappointing today to see the government who initiated this war and who have been the reason for why so many innocent civilians have paid the price, and for why we today are where we are in Afghanistan and on the Afghanistan crisis. It's sad to see the shameful and the cowardice remarks from President Biden, his lack of accountability. I think because of that, I don't know if we can depend on any sort of democracy. I don't know if we can depend on any sort of solution to what's going on right now. But what I can say is that what we all know and what we all see and what's very visible is that over 2.7 million people have been displaced in their own country. Everyone has fled to Kabul. The situation there is so dire. It's tiresome for the Afghan community to be advocating for this, right? When the international community is not willing to step in, and when those leaders who are in charge and who were supposed to be the ones to take action and swiftly take action on this are now kind of stepping down and backing away from the table.
Right. So, we've seen so many, young and brave journalists still going to work and still reporting and still doing their job. Now, coming to the, women MPs, do you think they will be able to continue for very long, or will women be able to, aspire to lead?
What we're hearing from women parliamentarians is that right now they're fearing their lives. A lot of them are in hiding. A lot of them have nowhere to go. I know that the Canadian government in particular is working really hard to get those who are most vulnerable out as soon as possible. But with the situation in Afghanistan right now, particularly in these past couple of days, the devastating images and videos that we've seen come out of the airport in Kabul, we're not sure where exactly things are going to go from here. We're not sure how the environment will be for women parliamentarians to go back and take their seats, which again is devastating because we've worked so much towards progress. We worked so much to get the voice of Afghan women in these walls that are so crucial for change, not only within the nation, but it also rings as a feeling of hope for those of us around the world that Afghan women can take leadership roles. But from what we're hearing directly from some of these members of parliament, I'm not sure if that will be the case, but I pray that it is, and I hope that it is. We'll only be able to see as the situation continues to unfold.
Neelofar, just this last question that I have from you. What would be your appeal to the international community today? Not just the international community, but citizens of the world as well.
I think, like I said before, we have to stop approaching this issue as though it's limited to the Afghan people. It's a humanitarian crisis. Every nation in the world has a moral responsibility right now, particularly those who have been complicit in this war, particularly those who have had a hand in this long-standing war, to step in. We owe it to, for example, Canadians like myself, we owe it to our troops, right, to speak up. They've sacrificed so much. We owe it to our communities, and we owe it to the values that I mentioned before, the most basic principles of human rights. And I hope that's something that not just state actors and not just international leaders hear out, but the public, because as we know and as we've seen particularly this year, social media and digital media is a very powerful tool, and opportunities like this that you have created, spaces like this that you have created, these are important tools for us to continue raising awareness. And as soon as we stop talking about this issue, I guarantee you that the situation there will only become worse. Right now, if we continue together collectively to put pressure on not only the international community, but on the people, right? On the citizens of the world, like you said, to continue speaking up and raising our voices, then perhaps maybe we can come to some sort of a resolution, or at least have some sort of hope even on the topic of humanitarian aid, right? To support back home. For those who are interested in helping, there are several organizations, charitable foundations that you can donate to. The International Development Relief Foundation just launched one. They're an accredited organization. They're doing incredible work. And again, I think a lot of the discourse around this war and around the situation in Afghanistan has been extremely divisive. And we as the people need to remember that we have to put people before the politics. Afghan people are neighbors. They're neighbors of Hindustan. They're neighbors of Pakistan. They're neighbors of Tajikistan. Like, we, at the end of the day, cannot let politics get in the way of basic values and the ultimate goal of saving innocent civilians who are losing their lives right now, who don't have access to hygiene, who don't have access to the food, who don't have access to shelter, they're displaced. We need to support them, and we can only do that through a collective voice. And with each voice that gets added to that, we will only be louder. We will only be able to get the international community's attention faster. And hopefully, at least in that way, we can make some sort of a change together and, again, put people before the politics and help immediately instead of forward looking when perhaps it might be too late.